Okay, so I've got some objects modelled here for this museum project, and the main surfaces there have materials, but maybe they're not set up in the way I want them to. And I'm actually going to use this opportunity to change that floor material to concrete, and just show you some things about the different settings you have. So at the moment it's timber, and just to remind you about the basic process you should use to change your materials, I'm going to go to edit type, and you can see there it's a floor called standard timber wood finish. I want it to be a concrete floor, so I'm going to duplicate that floor and change it to concrete floor and polished, because I'm going to have basically a polished concrete finish. And then when I go to edit the structure, now I can change these things without worrying about affecting that other timber floor, which could be used in other parts of the project. And so here it's got the oak flooring layer on top. I'll come back and change that to concrete in a moment, but you've also got here this these extra layers which at the moment are set to timber, so it's a good chance to get rid of those and get the structure working properly. So I've deleted one of those elements, and then I'm going to have just a single structural layer, which I'll change to pretty much any of the concrete materials that I already have in the project. I'm only going to be seeing these in sections, so when you're working with your materials, think about the use you'll have for them. And so if you look at these concrete materials that are already there in the project, you'll see that most of them show up with this cut pattern, which is the typical concrete cut pattern. Some of them have a surface pattern as well, but we won't see the surface pattern. We'll never see this layer from the outside. We'll only see it when it's cut. And so any of these materials that have the correct cut pattern will do. So I'll use this one, concrete cast in place concrete. I'll just show you the appearance there. It's going to be pretty terrible. Let's see. Okay, so pretty ugly concrete, but again, we're not going to see that. So all I really care about is the cut pattern. Let's click OK there. I think this is okay. And then the finish is going to be the screed layer of concrete, which would be on top of the structural layer. And that would have a thickness about that, 19-20 mil. And you don't need to make that all that accurate anyway, as long as you've got some separate layer to show that you do know that you need a finish layer of concrete to get that nice finish. And the function should be set to finish. Now, if you're wondering what the two finish options are for, finish 1 basically can be used for exterior finishes, and finish 2 for interior finishes. And that way things join up. So the things that are finish 1 will join up together in your sections, and the things that are finish 2 will join up in your sections. And that's really what those numbers represent. That's the order that they connect. And then this one I'll leave it structure. And so then the material, I'll go and change that now. And again, I'm going to start with one of these existing concrete materials. Well, I've got one called concrete sand cement screed, which is probably a pretty good material for this. So I've been showing you that you can duplicate these materials to create new ones. But I'm going to assume this material isn't being used by anything else, and well, if it is, I don't mind changing it anyway to make it look better. So I'll maybe just rename it though by right clicking, and I'll just make it concrete screed, because again that's what it is. So it's good just to think about how you're managing your materials, realise that this is the list of materials in your project. I know you can get the panel down below which shows the asset browser, and it's with the folder options down here. So is it this one? I always forget which one, I don't use it. But if you see the sorry, let's just go back to that. What am I doing there? So if you see the asset browser down here, It's this one, sorry, library panel. You can make new materials that way, and that will make new complete materials, but I think it's a bad habit to get into using that. It'll just add new materials to the list in your project, which makes it harder to manage. So I think get out of the habit of using that one, and just start with the materials that you have in your project and modify and duplicate those when you need to. So back to this one, concrete, well, I lost my name, so I'll just rename that again, concrete screed, just so you can see it's got a different name. And then the graphics, I don't really mind if it's got a different cut pattern to the main concrete floor. The surface pattern I want definitely set to none. I can't stand it when you have a concrete floor that shows a surface pattern in your plan. It looks terrible. You're better off just using a single colour if you want to indicate the material in plan. But then the appearance is the important thing. And here you can see non-uniform warm grey 1 is being used by something else. So that number there, 1, indicates that you need to think about changing this. If you go through, you can probably find the one it's being used by, one of these others. Here we go, it's this material that's that I've just looked at. Okay, so they're both using the same render appearance. And I could just change that, but because I want to get a different material from the library anyway, I'm going to replace it. And that is another good habit, especially when you see it's being used by something else, so that you don't change things unnecessarily. Replace, and then it'll take you to the main asset library that Revit gives you, and this is the big resource that you have for rendering. With all the Autodesk programs, they give you this asset library of render materials. The other assets that give you the full materials with the graphics set up as well, I don't think it gives you much, because you can set those things up yourself really easily, but this does give you a lot. So in concrete, there are some pretty good concrete materials, and one that I use all the time is the flat grey 1. So I'm going to double click on that, and you'll see it gives you a concrete material that uses an image of concrete, not a procedure, not a formula. So you'll see you have different options to use these procedural textures, which can be good, but I think generally photo-based materials tend to look more realistic. So this is an image photo of some concrete, which you can then adjust. And so this is giving you a preview. It's good to look at that preview, make it bigger if you want to. And I'll go down to change this to a plane so they can see what it looks like as a floor. And you can see then that it's fairly obvious that it's going to be tiled at this size. I'll increase the render quality, or it's on production quality already. So I'm going to go and click on that swatch and start by changing the size. You can overscale most photo-based textures, and if you're going to be seeing it over a large expanse, it's a good way of reducing that tiled effect. So here I'm going to make it say 1200 wide, and just let it go to whatever height, 800 and something. Done, and that will make it again less obvious that it's being repeated. If I then go to work with the glossiness, we can increase that. It's not going to be so obvious on this floor sample, so I'll change that back to a cube, and you'll see then the glossiness effect start to be more obvious. And then it's, I think for polished concrete, really good to have reflectivity as well. Now with reflectivity, to give the effect of a glossy type of material like this, it's good to have a different direct and oblique value. And essentially I tend to use about double the oblique, or double the direct value for the oblique. So there you can see I've got on about 20, and then the direct on about 9 or 10. and you can even take the direct reflections down further, but that means as you change the angle of your view, the reflections are going to change, and that gives you a more realistic indirect reflection. Okay, so then you can put bumps in as well, but I think that's all I'll do for this material for now. Just OK, and then OK, and OK. And now I can see it in this view, because I've got it set to realistic. I can see that concrete material as it's going to appear in the render. It's looking OK, but maybe it's still not quite big enough. Right, so back in the Manage tab this time, I'm not going to go and select that object again. I'll just go straight to Manage, then Materials, and under Appearance, click on the swatch and just try making that bigger again. So I'll try 2400. Way over scale, but you can get away with it with these textures quite often. And there we are. So that's looking a bit better for this space, the scale of the space that I have. Okay, so I'll just give you a few more examples using photo-based textures. Okay, and so with the you've got the laneway at the back where you would see probably a face brick wall, because it's you know, an old area. So I'll just put in something quick there to give me that. I'm just going to use a well, I won't even use a wall. I'll just put in a an extrusion modelled in place, and I'll set it to walls for the category, and this is neither here nor there. Just make an extrusion just to get something quick in there. So it's about this size. Actually, I've got the satellite image there. So there it is. Now I've cheated a little bit and I've put these bikes in there on really what's the next door property, but I'm going to leave them because I don't want to have them coming up in the render. And I'll just make this box high enough, and again see how that's looking in the render. So that's going to show up in that window there pretty clearly. Notice you've got to switch to a non-perspective view to finish your families, and you're probably used to this. Once I go to finish model, I can finish that, but I'm going to just go back to edit in place, select it, and then I'm sure you're all getting used to this. When you want to change the material of an in-place family, you have to go and edit it, and then you can select the solid and find the material property. Okay, so I'll go and assign something to that solid, and you'll see I've got some masonry materials there. I'll just choose one of these. But I'm going to do something extra to make it easy to adjust that. Again, with it still selected, with the solid selected, you'll see next to the material button you have a little button that you maybe have clicked on and then just cancelled it straight away when you've seen this come up. It's actually a really useful thing to add a parameter, so I'll do that, and I'll call it wall material. That's it. OK, OK, finish model, and now I can simply select that family now and go to edit type, and you can see there's the parameter. It makes it much easier to adjust things like materials when you've made a lot of in-place families. And so again, I'll browse and change that to a different brick material. So there are some OK render materials already set up there, but none of them are really what I want. I want to get an older type of brick. So I'm going to instead of changing any of these, duplicate that material by just right-clicking. Change it to masonry brick existing. and then replace the appearance. So hopefully you're getting used to that process. In the appearance library, going to masonry. There are some old style bricks in here. Sorry, let's go down to brick. No, sorry, I'm thinking of another library. So I'm just going to start with any of these. So the it doesn't really matter which one. Let's go for the English. And actually, though, that's not too bad. So at least that is a less even brick style. And then looking at the number of courses there, you can make that a real world size. Unlike the concrete, where I'm basically just sizing it to get the look I want, with something like this, you'd want to make it the size of a brick in real life, or close to it. Maybe a little bit overscale, because it's in the distance. So if I've got, let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 16 courses within that distance there. That would mean, if I just assume the course is made, I'm going to make them a little bit bigger than a real brick course. A real brick course is 76 mil plus your 10 mil. So you can make them 85, but in this case I'm going to make them 100. And if we've got 16, that will mean 1600 high. Okay, so I'll close that one. And this one doesn't have a bump map. It'd be nice if it did, so let's look at the image, and you'll see the name of it is Masonry Unit Brick Modular English. So I'll click on that name, and then we'll see. Okay, so it's an image that doesn't have a corresponding bump by the look of it. Oh yes, here we go, English cross. I think that, no, that's a different one. Modular, let's have a look. Okay, so you can see these are all JPEG files, so the more you work with these, the easier it'll be to create your own textures. So I'm going to, well, first just right click and open with Photo Viewer. And actually that looks pretty right. Let's go to the next. That's the English cross, that's the English modular. Yep, so I'm going to go back. The English modular is close enough to the English cross that I'm going to use it instead, because it has a bump map. And it's a good way to look at these things. So here I can change that file to the other one that has a corresponding bump map. And then turn on bumps and use the corresponding bump map image, which just got to get the right name. So let's look at it here. Masonry unit, so it's right down here. Modular English cross bump, that's it. Okay, so you can see, I'll just show you one of these bump maps. So it's basically a black and white version of the original colour image. And you can make your own by simply opening them in Photoshop, setting it to grayscale, and then playing with things like invert and the contrast to make it have basically the black parts are low the white is high. So this is not perfectly done. They've just played around with the contrast to make this one. It'll do a pretty good job, but you can see there that the white here in the mortar is actually going to come up high. So it'll give a bumpy effect. It won't be a perfect bump though. So you could open this in Photoshop and make those mortar parts all darker, and you would get a more realistic bump if you need to do a close-up, but because this is in the distance, it'll work pretty well as it is. Okay, so the bumps need to be the same size as the image itself. So going back to the image, again you can see that I had the height set to 1600. So here I need to set the height as well to the same value, 1600. Again, I'll change the preview there to maybe a cube and increase the quality to see how it's on production quality. It's just updating. There we are. So you can see then the bumps come up reasonably well. Okay, so then back to graphics, just to check the pattern. This is how it'll show up in your shaded view, so it's up to you how you want that to display, but that's a pretty good setup for brickwork. So okay, and it's going to show brick on all of the sides of this box I've made. If we see it from the top, that'll be a problem, but we probably won't. So back to the image there, and now I can see that brickwork coming through pretty well. Going into just plain materials, so these big flat surfaces that I have here, I want them just to have some simple paint finishes. And so with something like a wall, again going to edit type, and I'll edit the structure there. You can see it's got this single layer that's set to 120 thickness. Now if you want different colours on either side of your wall, it's important to have extra layers. And even if you want the same colour all the way around, it'll help you to start putting in layers for the different finishes, particularly when you get to the next part of your project where you've got to put in the wall construction details. This will do a lot of that work for you as well. So at the moment it's a 120 wall. I'm going to insert a new layer, and then using the up and down buttons you can control where that goes. So I'll move it to the top, and think about the core as essentially as your structure. Okay, so these core boundaries go either side of your structure generally, and then the function of this new layer, I'll set that to finish 2, because this is an internal wall, so we don't need it to join with any exterior finishes. And the thickness I'll set to 10 mil, and then I'll change the material for this one right now. And so you have paint materials. If I go down there, you can see there are some render materials already set up, and then further down you'll have some others that are just given names like wall paint quite often. So you can start with any of those. I'll just start with this one, wall paint material or wall material, and duplicate, and I'll call it, well, it's really plasterboard, so I'll call it wall or plasterboard painted. And then I'll come back to the graphics, but I'll set the appearance first, and you can see again it's got this wall material which has been used by something else, and notice it's a generic material. So I know it's tempting when you just want a paint colour to go in and just change the material, but it's a generic material initially, and that means it's going to give you more options, probably more than you want at first. So I'm going to get a new material again by just replacing the asset, replace button, and in the appearance folder you'll see there's a wall paint material folder. You have all sorts of colours there, so I'm just going to go for a simple colour there, so some sort of red, and you have glossy and matte materials for each of these usually, or for most of them you have those options. Okay, so double clicking there will bring it in, and you've always got the option of changing that finish afterwards. So we've got the different paint finish options, which are really useful as a starting point for paint materials, flat, pearl and so on, gloss. So I'm happy to leave this one on matte. Just make sure you know about that. It's really important for uniform materials. And then the application as well, it's worth thinking about that. And I might go to roller for this one. And you can of course adjust the colour. And so when you're setting plain colours, just make sure you're comfortable working with red, green and blue. They're the only primary colours you need to work with. But then if you want to go further with any adjustments, you can always duplicate that material as a generic material. So notice at the moment it's a wall paint material. That is how the settings are generated. So you only have these 3 settings for a wall paint material. Once I right click on appearance and duplicate as generic, it'll convert that material into generic, obviously, where you'll see then all of those settings are turned into something else. So the glossiness value and down here the bumps come from the settings I had in the original wall paint, which essentially means you can adjust those further. So if the speckles are too much, I'll just make this a larger preview. So those speckles might be too much, and that's a problem in a lot of renders. You'll see that the speckles are an issue with low quality renders, or renders where you can't get the quality high enough. You can always just reduce either the amount or turn that off altogether. Here, I'll just take that down. So just to 1 is what I want. It's a very subtle effect. And then again, things like the glossiness you can change directly as well, which can be handy. And you can, if you want to, put reflectivity in, which is a nice thing, I think, on some paint materials. Just a subtle reflection can really help. So not much direct, but a little bit of a bleak. Alright, so I've got that material on one side. I'm going to change the thickness of the structure just to 100, and then insert a copy of that layer. And so just move that to the bottom and make it have the same properties. So finish 2, thickness 10, and the same material. So notice how it's set to wraps on both ends of this material, which means it will wrap around at the end on, and we'll have it on at ends interior there, so that that material, the plasterboard, will wrap around when this wall has an exposed edge. Okay, and then you can see this wall does have that exposed edge, so I want that, if you zoom in there, to have the, you can just see it here, the plasterboard on that side. So it's just, it's a bit hard to see, but you can hopefully see there, it's red in that gap between the 2 lines. If I hadn't done the wraps, then it would be showing the structure material. Okay, so hopefully I'll give you an idea about the main properties you have for materials, and I'll just maybe remind you about the main things. Okay, so just remember, with materials generally, the graphics is a separate thing, but looking at the appearance, I'm going to actually, so with this plasterboard material, I'm leaving that on grey, because I don't want that to show in my shaded views just yet. But the appearance, you'll see you have a range of different templates when you work with appearance, and I've only shown you a couple of them. Wall paint, and there was in concrete as well, a couple of them, but there are a few others, metal, and well, let's see if we go and look at some of the fabric materials. So they're using wall paint. This one is generic. There's a metal one. The others, it's difficult to remember them all, but you'll see that if you go into 3ds Max, it's a lot easier to access these. There's a metal one. So those templates, if you like, give you the main settings for each of those materials. But then generic, okay, so this one here is generic. Generic will give you all the different options, but it's sometimes harder to set up those basic preset values. And so it's not a bad thing to start with those preset materials like wall paint and metal, and then if you want to go further with them, you know, right click on the Appearance tab, duplicate as generic, and then you can really go for it and change everything. So especially with things like light materials, you want to have the self-illumination option quite often, and so you can always bring that up by making material into a generic. Okay, so anyhow, I'll finish that video there. I'll do another one for you on lighting.